I also see it as a very specific, very distinct boundary between our world and this other world, the world of spirits or the world of magic. And we can either be there or we can be here, or as a warning that we cannot really stay there, because it all at some point it all dissolves. Yes, and we are back to the reality. Hello everyone, and welcome back to my Rulit YouTube series, where we talk about Russian literature in English translations, which is a little bit less known to the broad audience. My name is Katya, and today we are going to talk about fantasy literature. Are you a fan of sci-fi or fantasy? I am. Since the time when I was a little girl, and didn't speak English, I would read Alice in Wonderland in translation, which was actually a very good English translation. And then when I was a bit older and I was already studying English, I've read Narnia. I think it was The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and it was one of the first books I actually read in English. And then I also remember very well when I was probably 12 or 11 how someone gave us the first volume of Lord of the Rings by Tolkien, and I've read it, and I was quite fascinated with it. Again, it was of course in Russian translation, and again I had to wait for about a year or a year and a half to get volume 2 and 3. And then I don't know, there were many other books, and I think right now one of my favorite fantasy and sci-fi writers is Neil Gaiman. Russian literature holds some spectacular samples of sci-fi fiction, such as Strugatsky brothers and their books. The most famous example is probably their Roadside Picnic, a novel which was adapted by Andrei Tarkovsky in 1979 when he produced his famous film Stalker. However, I am more partial to the 19th century fantasy literature, the stories that linger on the threshold between Gothic literature and Romanticism, heavily influenced by the German Romantics, mostly E.T.A. Hoffmann. Alexander Pushkin, whose stories we discussed here on my channel, is also influenced by this trend, and even though The Shot or The Snowstorm are relatively realistic, they still contain the powerful idea of fate and coincidence that permeate their plots and characters' destinies. The Queen of Spades, with its oblique plot and its mystical apparitions, can be definitely interpreted as a mystical story. But anyways, I would like to talk to you about Prince Vladimir Adoevsky, one of the first Russian writers whose stories can now be categorized as sci-fi or fantasy, depending on your own understanding of these genres. Personally, I love his stories for their humor, their fantasy, and the combination of Gothic and Romantic styles. Inspired by Hoffmann, he adopted the term dvoyemiria, a Russian word that can be translated as a coexistence of two worlds within one person's life, or dualism. You would probably ask me, what is it? Well, one of the most evident examples is The Nutcracker and the Mouse King. And I'm talking not about the ballet that people usually watch on Christmas, but a novella by E.T.A. Hoffmann. A side note, I love Tchaikovsky's ballet, and I grew up with this, and we always listened to it when I was a kid. Do you remember what happens there? Mary, the protagonist of the story, is taken into a doll kingdom by the Nutcracker. This is a magic world that coexists with the ordinary, mundane space of her parents' house, and traveling there is similar to being in a dreamland. We see these kinds of plots in lots of fantasy stories, including, for example, the aforementioned The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, where the path between our world and Narnia goes through a big wardrobe in an old country house. Adoevsky liked this plot device very much, and many of his stories are about the clash between the two worlds. Interestingly, many of them are actually quite dark and grim, as opposed to Hoffman's light-hearted and humorous The Golden Port or Little Tsaches. We will talk about these stories later, but now, as a more light-hearted and fun introduction, I want to show you A Town in a Snuff Box, a short story for children, written by Vladimir Adoevsky in 1834. And again, another side note, I know I keep on returning to my childhood, but this story used to be one of my favorites when I was a kid, and I actually had it as an audio play on a vinyl record, and so I would listen to it endlessly, and because of that I can remember actually big parts, big chunks of this story still to this day, yes, even though it was many years ago. In many ways, this story can be perceived as a parallel to Hoffman's Nutcracker, because in this story we always see a very similar plot. This story also stars the young boy Misha, who is fascinated by the mechanism inside his dad's snuff box, and he dreams about getting inside this world to see how come that this contraption can play music and move the figures. Finally, Misha was sure that the music was playing in the snuff box. He went up to it. He saw the sun rise from behind the trees and steal quietly over the sky, while the sky and the town grew lighter and lighter. The windows shone brightly and the turrets seemed to be glowing. Then the sun crossed the sky to the other side, sank lower and lower, and finally disappeared behind a little hill. The town grew dark, the shutters closed, and the turrets faded, but not for long. A star lit up, then another, and then a crescent moon peeped out from behind the trees, and the town grew bright again, the windows gleamed with silver, and the turrets gave off a bluish light. Suddenly Misha sees a little boy bell that invites him to enter the snuff box, which suddenly becomes big enough for him to enter. Just like Marie in the Nutcracker, he can see a hidden tiny world in details and in depth. Seeing something that's not visible to human eye was one of the obsessions of that time, and specifically of Hoffman. For example, his Meister Floh, or Master Flea, is about the microscopic universe that can only be seen through the lenses of Leeuwenhoek, an actual inventor of the microscope. And in this tale, he is actually one of the characters, and he runs a flea circus. We will encounter this motif many times as we talk about both the Adoevsky and other writers of this age. A theme of magic boxes, optical illusions, contraptions, and magnifying glasses, all of them to be interpreted as a portal to the other world. In the snuff box, Misha meets other boy bells who complain about angry uncles that keep on striking them, yes, so that they could ring their tune. And the hammer uncles really were knocking the bells all the time. First this one and then that, and even poor Misha felt sorry for them. And then Misha discovers that the hammer uncles are being nudged by the cylinder, whom they call an overseer. Misha went to the overseer. He really was lying on the sofa in his dressing gown, tossing from side to side, but always with his face upwards. And all his dressing gown was studded with hundreds of little pins and hooks. Whenever a hammer appeared, he would hook it and let it go, and the hammer knocked a bell. And finally he discovers Queen's spring, a contraption that sets everything in motion. She prods the cylinder nudges the hammers strike the bells, and thus the music plays. Astonished, Misha tries to push the spring to see if everything works just like she explained. And what happens then is a complete destruction of this little world. In the flash, the spring uncoiled, the cylinder whizzed round, the hammer knocked, the little bells began to ring nonsense, and the spring broke. Everything went quiet. The cylinder stopped, the hammers dropped, the bells swung to one side, the sun dropped, the houses broke. Then Misha remembered that his father had told him not to touch the spring. He grew frightened and woke up. Some scholars interpret this finale as Adoevsky's warning to children and to humankind against the disturbance of the natural order, even if, from Misha's point of view, it is unfair towards the boy bells, whom the hammers strike all the time. It still needs to be preserved, otherwise everything is going to be ruined. Personally, I interpret it as a typical resolution of a dream, just like in Lewis Carroll's Through the Looking Glass, where the final minutes of Alice's stay in the magical land are filled with the surreal and disturbing imagery. And then, as Alice afterwards described it, all sorts of things happened in a moment. The candles all grew up to the ceiling, looking something like a bed of rushes with fireworks at the top. As to the bottles, they each took a pair of plates, which they hastily fitted on as wings, and so with forks for legs went fluttering about in all directions. And very like birds they look, Alice thought to herself, as well as she could in the dreadful confusion that was beginning. I also see it as a very specific, very distinct boundary between our world and this other world, the world of spirits or the world of magic. And we can either be there or we can be here, or as a warning that we cannot really stay there, because it all at some point it all dissolves. Yes, and we are back to the reality. And here we are. I hope you have enjoyed this little insight into Dostoevsky's imagery and fantasy. Next time, I will tell you more about the origins of his ideas, and we will find out if the ability to see and comprehend everything is indeed a blessing. See you next time. Bye bye.